Another crazy week here, but that's just where we're at these days. I did not want to lose sight, though, of something that happened on Tuesday, which was the issuance of an opinion, a 161-page document from William Young, who is a judge in the Massachusetts district of our federal courts. Now, of course, I have to preface this and probably put a thumbnail on this video that calls Young a Republican judge because he was appointed by Ronald Reagan in 1985 to his seat that he currently still holds. But I'm sure that he would not identify himself in such overly simplistic terms. I'm sure, like all federal judges, Young would say that he's simply a jurist trying to do his best to interpret the meaning of the Constitution and its applicability in legal disputes happening right now. But since we live in an environment where people's political leanings, which always seem to fall either left or right, and nowhere in between, are used as justification for policy and are scrutinized in the event of everything from a mass shooting to a court decision, I thought it was important to note that, yes, Young was appointed by a Republican president. Now, the ruling that he issued on Tuesday deals with the Trump administration's targeting of students and faculty who are here in the United States on visas, who are outspoken critics of Israel's war in Gaza. Young said, in no uncertain terms, that what the Trump administration did through officials at DHS and at the State Department was to chill the speech, freedom of speech of these people. They did so by doing things like arresting student protesters and sending them to ICE facilities, initiating deportation proceedings against people like Mahmoud Khalil. Those actions, Young wrote, very much chilled the speech of people who were here legally, who then became afraid to speak out for fear that they too would get picked up by the State Department or DHS on their next trip back into the United States, or maybe even just walking down the street. Now, at the time all of this was going on, there was lots of protests on college campuses across the country about Israel's war in Gaza, and the Trump administration decided that it was going to crack down on those protesters by issuing an executive order and other internal policies that purportedly targeted what they were calling anti-Semitism, ties to terrorist organization or funding to terrorist organizations, or just speech that was sympathetic to terrorist organizations like Hamas. But the problem is they never really defined what any of that meant in concrete terms. Young called him out on this. And when he called the Trump administration out on the fact that they had no real definition of what any of this meant, and it was effectively whatever Marco Rubio or DHS Secretary Kristi Noem or maybe even Trump, but definitely Stephen Miller apparently, it was whatever they felt at the time on any given day what constituted anti-Semitism and sympathy towards terror. Young said that this was obviously a dangerous precedent for free speech when a group of officials can decide outside the bounds of law what people are allowed to say and not. So that's number one, blatant free speech violations, chilling of free speech. Big check on that one from Judge Young. But Young goes on further to say that unfortunately, nothing will happen as a result of this clear and obvious suppression of our First Amendment rights. Nothing will likely happen as a result of what he called the cowardly immigration agents who are wearing masks, terrorizing communities across the country. Young even says that what the Trump administration did to student protesters and others who were here legally opposed to the war in Gaza, what they did was even worse than the Red Scare, which was the American rights campaign of free speech oppression against anyone who remotely expressed sympathy for communist ideology back in the 1950s. The reason this is important, other than that the judge found that the Trump administration violated these people's free speech rights, is that we're seeing a furtherance of the government's pursuit of those who engage in speech that the government doesn't like. In the wake of Charlie Kirk's killing, the Trump administration signed executive orders, and there was press conferences being held and all sorts of stuff about how they were going to go after left-wing and liberal organizations for supposedly funding Charlie Kirk's killer or whatever. It doesn't really matter. The point is not that they are actually going to make a to B line between the Kirk assassination and something like the George Soros Foundation. The point is that they are going to use that as pretext to launch investigations and possibly prosecute organizations that hold political beliefs that are not aligned with the Trump White House. That, of course, will have the same chilling effect that was described in Young's opinion released on Tuesday. This entire opinion reads like a warning. and even a call to action for Americans concerned about executive overreach, which is just another way of saying Trump's authoritarian pushes towards absolute power. And that can come in a lot of forms. It can come in looking something like, we don't really have elections in 2026, or Trump's just joking when he wears the 2028 hat, and he's not actually going to try to serve a third term because that would be constitutionally impossible. Well, it's not impossible when the executive branch considers anything that the executive says or does as the law of the land, Constitution be damned. And that's where the unitary executive theory comes in. And that's what Young is warning against. At the beginning of his opinion, Young included a postcard, apparently a threat from some anonymous person that read, "Trump has pardons and tanks. What do you have?" Young then crafted his entire opinion in the form of a letter to this anonymous person, closing with a quote from Ronald Reagan. You might have heard some variation of this quote over the years that reminds Americans that our freedoms are not guaranteed and that they have to be fought for and supported by each new generation. Young says that Trump may have heard this quote, but if he did, he took the wrong lesson from it. Young wonders aloud in the last lines of his opinion whether Americans will defend our constitutional rights or whether we will be lulled into a false sense of security by thinking that the Trump administration isn't ever going to come after us. They're always just going to go after those guys, the bad guys, the ones engaging in the speech that's violent or supports terrorists. Young notes that if we let that happen to them, it'll eventually happen to us. But these last lines of Young's opinion, and really the whole thing, are not just a letter to the person who sent the anonymous threat or a call to action for Americans who already are in disagreement with Trump. It's also a warning to those who support him, because Young says he fears that Trump believes we are so divided that we can't even come together anymore to protect our basic constitutional rights. This is obviously a cynical way to look at Americans and American politics. And Young wonders aloud, is he correct? So is Trump right? Are we so divided that our friends and neighbors on the American right cannot or will not see past their support for Trump or their desire for vengeance against liberals that they won't even defend their own constitutional rights? I don't know. Young leaves it as an open question.